Let's go!
That's the crazy one. Even Battle Network, right? Mega Man Battle Network, I think, is about to become one of the best-selling Mega Man games. It sold like 1 million copies in its first week, which is really good. Yeah, I think Resident Evil pulled 3 million in the first 3 days. So you're saying Capcom's back? I mean, jeez, that's an interesting conversation. Just how good Capcom is doing right now and how good Street Fighter is going to do and how everything is just nothing but sunshine and rainbows. Why is that? Well, it's because they're actually doing what people want, right? Number one, they finally grew a brain on top of their shoulder. The head on their shoulders finally sprouted with a brain in it. This is something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. The term CapGod had existed for some time, established in forums and amongst fandom around the mid-2000s. It was around the time frame of Street Fighter 4's relaunch, as well as other games like Resident Evil 5, which, you know, to many wasn't as good as Resident Evil 4, but was pretty good. And there was a Devil May Cry 4. Like, a lot of these games were hitting in ways that were making people really happy. So, if not Marvel 3, you know, around that time frame, Capcom was kind of known as being the CapGods. Right around when I start making content, right around when I start doing video production and I start making YouTube videos and working for companies like Capcom on promotional material and other companies, things start to go downhill. The first biggest sign to me was some absolute ridiculous, the turning of CapGod to Crapcom started around early 2010s when there was an absolute hilarious amount of mismanagement when it came to certain sides of the business. Number one, Keiji Inafune, who was largely known as the Mega Man creator. He's not. Inafune was outsourcing a lot of big projects that could have been made in-house at Capcom, development studios across the world, because he felt that video game development scene, the business of making games in Japan, of eastbound made games, was actually going away. Games like Call of Duty and these other titles were essentially the new future for the video game industry. At this time, Inafune was pretty high up in the Capcom food chain. He'd been there since like the 80s. In the cheapest way possible, gets a lot of developers that don't have a lot of like notoriety, don't have a huge amount of tenure, and are putting games together that are just crazy. I heard stories from the Double Helix guys of, you know, we saw the Mega Man X game that was essentially a clone of like Metroid Prime. Games like Remember Me, Lost Planet 3, Bionic Commando, and games like Dark Void came as a result. A lot of big Capcom franchises are now outsourced to other developers. A long story short, all these games come out and they just don't perform. None of them sell even marginally to the degree of which they want them to sell. And this isn't even including the fighting division side. I would like to tell you, this is how poorly managed things were at Capcom, at least in the fighting game division side. In the span of 1 year, you get a little game called Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Comes out around November of 2011. To preface that mismanagement, the other version of the game that came before it was only about 9 months total because it came out in February. So Marvel 3 Vanilla already came out in the same year. And then they had an update to the game that came out was practically announced, like, I'm not even kidding you, 4 months later. 4 to 5-ish months later, they already announced another version of the game, which was like, buddy, what the hell? People were pissed, and then they release Ultimate Marvel 3, and it doesn't sell at all. It sells less than 100,000 units in its first month. So this is bad. Why is it also bad? 2.5 months later, there would also be a brand new fighting game on the horizon. 2.5-ish months later, you get a brand new game, Street Fighter Cross Tekken. A brand new fighting game that was essentially competing with its own, and it doesn't sell super well either. It's also revealed that there's on-disc DLC, all this ridiculous shit happens, and people find out most of the roster for an expansion that's coming out soon is already done or near completion, so it goes over very poorly. A few months after that, Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike Online Edition all pop up within like a similar time period, right? Not only that, in around mid-2012, there was also Marvel vs. Capcom Origins, and a little bit of time after that, 6 months, this is like, you know, let's say this was a year and a half, also Darkstalkers Resurrection. Within a year and a half time frame, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike Online Edition, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, Darkstalkers Resurrection, Marvel vs. Capcom Origins. That is 7 fighting games that came out in the span of 2 years. Essentially cannibalized the genre completely, so that by the end of those releases, they weren't selling anything. Darkstalkers was essentially sent to die. CapGod has essentially gone to Crapcom at this point. A lot of other releases, like the ones I mentioned, just come out to middling reviews. And then to top it all off, the Street Fighter V fiasco happens, where the game essentially comes out with almost no content. At this point, I was essentially like Captain Capcom. I was having to quite literally make videos on this. This was also like my livelihood, so this was a very rough time to be a Capcom fan. Mega Man's Legends 3 was canceled, all this shit, and then Resident Evil 6 happened. Yeah, I'm just glossing over some of the other shit, right? It would take until 2017, and I remember this vividly. 2017 happens. Resident Evil 7 has pretty great demos, and the game launches in early 2017, and it's good, really good, weirdly good, and it's on a brand new engine that Capcom made themselves. They weren't ducking behind, you know, some old engine that they had forever, if not like Unreal or anything. To me, I'll never forget the moment where it was after a half a decade of just, oh my god, can we just get something that doesn't suck? RE7 came out and it was shockingly really good. So a Capcom game came out in 2017, and it doesn't have some insane stipulations behind it. It doesn't have some crazy, you know, ridiculous, horrible news associated with it that is going to mire the situation and ruin the game in some way. That was the start of it, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows from that point forward, because MVCI came out in 2017 as well, later that year, disappointed in sales, and didn't really make anybody very happy. However, to follow up that would be their best-selling game of all time. Monster Hunter finally goes off of like handheld / mobile platforms. Monster Hunter World is the biggest shit ever. Resident Evil 7 was the idea that, oh, maybe Capcom has changed their ways. Monster Hunter World was really the beginning, because almost everything that came out from Capcom in 2018 after Monster Hunter World has been good. There's definitely some fumbles in between there. 2018 Mega Man 11 comes out, and the reason I remember this is that 2018's E3, I was playing RE2, saw DMC5, and I played Mega Man 11, and I was like, wow, this is actually good. Mega Man 11 comes out later that year, and it is the best-selling Mega Man game of all time. Hard to think that, but yes, that's actually true. Street Fighter V starts getting some necessary updates that it's really needed. I think the later versions that they're in at that time, it's not Championship Edition yet, but arcade version gets some substantial great updates going into like Season 3, so that's really good news. And then the following year is like the banger year. Within the first 3 or 4 months, holy shit, Resident Evil 2 Remake comes out and essentially redefines Resident Evil. And it's incredible, which is crazy because RE5 was the best-selling game forever, for like a decade, you know? It's fucking fantastic. Iceborne comes out, fantastic expansion, sells like half the copies of Monster Hunter World did. So it was an incredible expansion. So 2020 rolls around. There's a fumble, sure, there's a fumble. Resident Evil 3 Remake doesn't hit the expectations that I think fans were looking for. It's decent, but it's not nearly in the same quality as a Resident Evil 2 Remake. In 2021, Monster Hunter Rise sells ridiculously well. And later on, it gets other versions, and now it's like one of their, I think it's their second best-selling game of all time. There's also a Ghosts and Goblins remake that it's actually super great, and in the same vein as Mega Man 11, it's really good. RE8 comes out like in a near close time frame after that, and now like moving forward a little bit more. You know, there's just collections and Street Fighter collections, and them actually bringing some Capcom fighting games that have never made their way to consoles in any way at all. Street Fighter V finally becomes the game it was always meant to be, you know? Season 5 really solidified that. So here we are, like pretty much today. Resident Evil 4 Remake is now looking to be one of the best-selling Resident Evil games and is fucking awesome. Street Fighter 6 might be one of the best-selling Street Fighter games ever, next to Street Fighter 2. And on the horizon, who knows after that? I think in our current state, in the current situation between the Capcom fighting game division and the other elements of Capcom, between like Resident Evil and Monster Hunter and the other big other side of Capcom, and also re-releases, which is, Capcom always does this. They always re-release their games. I think we've hit a CapGod status absolutely on the Monster Hunter side, the Resident Evil side, and the re-releases. On the fighting game side, I don't think it's technically CapGod status until Street Fighter 6 comes out and it's good, you know? Because we've played, I've been fortunate enough to play the final build of the game. We know it's good. Once the game's out, World Tour mode is good. The single player things are good. The online's running great. You know, they run similar to the beta. The characters are fun to play. Once all those things happen, it's obviously a game that is released by Capcom in 2023. That is a fighting game that is clearly worth its full price tag. And that's important. It would be wonderful if we got Capcom fighting games that wasn't just Street Fighter supported. If there could be just as supported and healthy of a Capcom fighting game franchise that wasn't just its mainline, you know, hero child, which is Street Fighter. That would be great, man. And if we can actually have like a Capcom Cup that had both games, and this has always been a dream, the reality of the Capcom Cup supporting multiple Capcom titles and not just Street Fighter, I hope is something that eventually comes true. And that's my true CapGod status right there.